The first time I realized I no longer existed in my own family, it happened in a group chat at 8:17 a.m. on a Monday. My phone buzzed while I was standing in line for coffee near my office in downtown Seattle. The chat was labeled Hollis Family Christmas. I hadn't muted it because I still believed, foolishly, that silence from them meant neutrality. I tapped the screen and watched the messages load. Hotel confirmations, a flight itinerary, a photo of a massive lodge in Aspen, Colorado, snow piled high against floor-to-ceiling windows. My father, Richard Hollis, wrote, "Booked for everyone, Christmas week. Can't wait to have the whole family together. Everyone except me." I scrolled up slowly, rereading names. My younger sister, Brooke Hollis. My older brother, Evan Hollis. Their spouses, my parents, even my cousin's teenage son had been added to the booking list. My name wasn't there. Before my brain could soften it, before instinct could protect me, the truth landed clean and sharp. I wasn't forgotten. I was excluded. If you've ever felt that quiet drop in your stomach when you realize something important is happening without you, you already know where this is going. If you're still listening, stay with me. Like the story if this sounds familiar. Comment if you've lived it. Subscribe if you want to hear what happens when someone finally stops absorbing the damage and starts returning it, calmly. I stepped out of line, coffee abandoned, and typed a single sentence. "Hey, I think my name might have been left off the reservation list. Just checking." 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared. My mother, Elaine Hollis, didn't respond in the chat. She called. Her voice was composed, pleasant in the way she used when she wanted something to sound reasonable. "Oh, Claire, this wasn't meant to upset you." That sentence. It always came before something that did. "What do you mean?" I asked. There was a pause. Not confusion. Calculation. "Your father and I thought it might be best if you didn't come this year." I stood on the sidewalk as commuters brushed past me. Steam rising from sewer grates, the city moving forward, while I stayed still. "Best for who?" Elaine sighed softly, as if I were the difficult one. "Brooke is hosting Christmas morning at the lodge. It's important to her. You know how sensitive she's been lately." Sensitive. That was the word they always used when Brooke wanted something unreasonable and expected everyone else to adjust. "I'm her sister," I said. "I'll be in Aspen anyway. I can book my own room." Another pause. Longer this time. "Claire, Brooke asked us not to invite you." I waited for the rest. There was always a justification. "She feels like you bring tension, that you make things uncomfortable. This is supposed to be a peaceful holiday." I laughed once. It came out dry, almost mechanical. "By existing?" Elaine's tone cooled. "This isn't about blame. It's about harmony." Harmony was what they called it when everyone revolved around Brooke. I ended the call politely. I always did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I thanked her for telling me. Then I went back to my office and sat at my desk for an hour without opening a single file. I was 32 years old. I was the director of compliance at a mid-sized healthcare technology company with federal contracts in 5 states. I managed regulatory audits worth millions. I owned my condo outright. I paid my own bills. I'd never borrowed money from my parents, not once. And I had just been quietly removed from Christmas. This wasn't new. It was just clearer. Growing up, Brooke Hollis was the miracle. The surprise baby. The pretty one. The fragile one. The one whose feelings required constant protection. I was the reliable one. I was the kid who learned early that being useful was safer than being loved. When Brooke forgot her homework, teachers were unreasonable. When I brought home a 97 instead of a 100, my father asked what happened to the other 3 points. Evan floated somewhere in the middle. He learned to stay out of it. I left home at 18, paid my way through the University of Washington, worked 2 jobs, and built a life that didn't rely on permission. Brooke dropped out of college twice. My parents paid off her credit cards. They helped her buy a house she couldn't afford. And now, she was hosting Christmas in Aspen. There it was again. That quiet repetition. That familiar realization. I wasn't excluded because I'd done something wrong. I was excluded because I no longer fit the role. At lunch, my phone buzzed again. A text from Evan. "Hey, Mom said you're upset about Christmas. Maybe don't make this a big thing. It's just 1 year. Just 1 year. That phrase had followed every boundary they crossed. I didn't reply. That night, my best friend Natalie Pierce came over with Thai takeout and wine. Natalie had been my attorney since law school, and my friend since before either of us knew how useful sharp instincts could be. She listened without interrupting, her eyes narrowing slightly as I spoke. "They didn't forget you," she said finally. "They erased you." I nodded. Saying it out loud settled something in me, and erasure is intentional. Natalie leaned back. "So what are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. That question had weight, because for the first time, doing nothing felt like consent. What I didn't tell Natalie yet was this. 3 weeks earlier, my grandmother, Margaret Hollis, had called me privately. She was 89, sharp as glass, and had always watched the family dynamics without participating in them. She asked me if I was happy. I told her the truth, that I was stable, that I was calm, that I was tired of pretending not to notice patterns. She hummed quietly on the line. "I'm making changes to my estate," she said. "I want someone sensible involved." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just talk. Now, standing in my kitchen with Natalie, Aspen glowing on my family's group chat without me, I realized something was shifting. They thought removing me would keep things smooth. They had no idea what they'd just triggered. I looked at Natalie and finally answered. "I'm not fighting to be included. I'm going to let them finish what they started." Outside, the city lights flickered on, steady and indifferent. And somewhere between that group chat and the silence that followed, I stopped being the daughter who waited to be invited. Christmas was coming, and so was the reckoning. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The kind of early clarity that comes after a decision you didn't know you were ready to make. I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. There was no shaking, no urge to call anyone back and demand explanations. What I felt instead was distance, like I'd stepped a few feet outside my own life and could finally see the shape of it. I made coffee, black, no sugar, and opened my laptop. My calendar was full. A compliance review with the Department of Health and Human Services. A board update scheduled for Friday. Numbers, deadlines, authority. In every other part of my life, I was trusted to make decisions that affected thousands of people. In my family, I was still treated like a variable that needed to be managed. At 9:12 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from my mother, Elaine Hollis. "We hope you'll understand. This isn't personal." I stared at the message for a long time. Nothing is more personal than being removed quietly, without confrontation, without accountability. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my grandmother. Margaret Hollis answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady, unhurried. "Claire," she said, "I was wondering when you'd call." "So you know," I said. She gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Of course I know. Your mother called last night. She wanted reassurance." Reassurance of what? That she was doing the right thing. I closed my eyes. That tracked. "What did you tell her?" Margaret paused. "I told her that excluding one child to appease another never ends well." She didn't like that. Of course she didn't. Margaret didn't rush to fill the silence. She never did. She let people sit with their thoughts until the truth surfaced on its own. Finally, she spoke. "I'm glad you didn't make a scene." I almost smiled. I never did. "That restraint," she continued, "is precisely why they underestimate you." I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening. "Claire, I've watched this family for a long time. I know who carries weight and who carries noise. You've been carrying both for years, and no one bothered to notice." There it was. Not comfort, recognition. She continued, measured and precise. "I asked you a few weeks ago if you were happy, because I wanted to know who still had clarity. I'm revising my will. I want transparency, and I want someone involved who isn't motivated by control or appearances." I said nothing. I let her finish. "Your father assumes Evan will handle things. Your mother believes Brooke deserves more than she's earned. Neither of them understand the full scope of what they're managing." A small hook caught in my chest. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you're willing to be named executor." The word landed quietly, heavier than it sounded. Margaret Hollis wasn't wealthy in a flashy way, but she owned property, investments, a controlling stake in the family manufacturing business that my father managed but never owned outright. The Hollis Tool and Die Company had been around since the 1960s. It employed over 100 people. It was the unspoken backbone of my parents' lifestyle, and it wasn't theirs. "I'm not asking you to fight anyone," Margaret said. "I'm asking you to observe, to document, to be present when the time comes." I understood immediately what she meant. They didn't know this conversation was happening. "Yes," I said. "I'm willing." "Good," she replied. "I hoped you'd say that." After we hung up, I stood there longer than necessary, letting the implication settle. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was leverage. At work, I moved through the day with precision. I signed off on a corrective action plan that saved the company from a potential 7-figure fine. I chaired a meeting where 3 department heads deferred to my judgment without question. No one talked over me. No one dismissed me. At 4:37 p.m., my sister, Brooke Hollis, posted on Instagram a photo of Aspen, snow-dusted pine trees, a caption that read, "Family, traditions, peace." The comments filled quickly. So perfect. Goals. Nothing like Christmas with the people who matter. I didn't scroll further. That night, Natalie called. "I spoke to a colleague of mine," she said without preamble, "an estate attorney in Bellevue. Very discreet." I hadn't told her about Margaret yet. "Just in case," Natalie continued. "Families like yours tend to escalate when control shifts. You need to be prepared." Prepared for what? For them to pretend this was accidental. For them to minimize. And when that doesn't work, to blame you. I thought of Elaine's text. "This isn't personal." "I know," Natalie exhaled. "I'll send you a checklist. Documentation. Communication boundaries. No emotional responses in writing." She paused. "And Claire, when they realize you're no longer absorbing the damage quietly, they're going to push. Let them." The push came sooner than expected. 2 days later, my father, Richard Hollis, showed up at my condo unannounced. I saw him through the window first, hands in his coat pockets, the same posture he used when he wanted to look reasonable. I didn't rush to the door. When I opened it, he smiled tightly. "You've been hard to reach," he said. I stepped aside, letting him in. He sat at my kitchen table, glanced around, took in the clean lines, the absence of family photos. "Your mother's upset," he said. I poured myself water. Didn't offer him any. "I imagine she is. She feels like you're pulling away." I met his eyes, calmly. I was removed. He frowned slightly. "That's not fair." "It's accurate." He shifted. "Brooke didn't want tension. You know how she is." I did know. "And you agreed." He looked down at the table. "It's just Christmas." There it was again. The minimization. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Dad, I manage federal compliance. When someone removes a stakeholder without notice, it's not a misunderstanding. It's a decision." He didn't like that comparison. "We raised you better than this," he said. That was new. Better than what? Than holding grudges. Than making things difficult. I nodded once. "I'm not making anything difficult. I'm responding appropriately." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, "Your grandmother's been distant lately." "So I've noticed." He looked up sharply. "Have you spoken to her?" "Yes." "About what?" I held his gaze, my voice even. "About accountability." His jaw tightened. "Claire, don't turn this into something it doesn't need to be." I thought of Margaret's voice. Who carries weight and who carries noise? I didn't respond. After a moment, he stood. "We'll talk later," he said, as if ending a meeting. "Anytime," I replied. He left without another word. That night, I wrote one sentence in a notebook Natalie had given me. "When silence stops protecting them, they will speak." Outside, December rain tapped softly against the windows. Aspen was coming. So was Christmas. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting to be invited into anything. I was watching the door close from the other side. The first thing my family did when they realized I wasn't chasing them was pretend nothing had changed. That's always phase 1. By the end of the week, the Hollis family Christmas chat went quiet. No apologies, no explanations. Just a steady stream of curated silence, as if exclusion only existed if it was acknowledged. I let it sit. On Monday, I flew to Chicago for work. 2 days of meetings with hospital executives and compliance officers who didn't smile unless they meant it. I presented a corrective framework that aligned 3 departments and prevented a federal audit escalation. At the end of the session, The COO shook my hand and said, "You have remarkable control under pressure." I thought about that word. Control. It was something my family valued deeply. They just didn't like when it wasn't theirs. On the flight home, my phone buzzed with an email from Natalie Pierce. Subject line: Heads up. Elaine Hollis contacted an estate firm this morning. Not the one your grandmother uses. She asked about modifying beneficiary structures on joint family assets. I read it twice. My mother didn't own my grandmother's estate. She never had. But she was trying to position herself as if she did. I typed back one sentence. Noted. Keep watching. When I landed, I drove straight to Margaret Hollis's house. She lived in a quiet neighborhood north of Seattle, the kind where nothing was flashy and everything was intentional. Her house sat back from the road, cedar siding, large windows, old-growth trees that had outlived most family disputes. She was at the kitchen table when I arrived, papers spread neatly in front of her. "You're early," she said without looking up. "I had a meeting canceled." She smiled faintly. "Convenient timing." She slid a folder toward me. "These are the preliminary revisions. Executor authority, medical proxy, contingency clauses." I skimmed the first page. The language was precise, surgical. "You're giving me a lot of power," I said. She folded her hands. "I'm giving it to someone who understands restraint." I looked up. "And Brooke?" Margaret's mouth tightened slightly. "Your sister has been counting on things she was never promised." There it was again, that quiet clarity. "What happens when they find out?" I asked. Margaret met my gaze. "They won't, until it's too late to adjust their behavior." She leaned back. "I'm not interested in punishing anyone. I'm interested in ending manipulation." We reviewed the documents together. Dates, conditions, legal language that turned assumptions into facts. Halfway through, Margaret stopped and looked at me. "You know this will change how they treat you." "They already have." "No," she said gently. "This time, they'll be afraid." Fear wasn't what I wanted, but I understood its usefulness. 2 days later, Brooke called. She never called. She texted when she wanted something. She delegated messages through my mother when she didn't want confrontation. I answered. "Hey, Claire," she said brightly, like nothing had happened. "Hi, Brooke." "We're finalizing plans for Aspen," she continued. "Mom said you were upset." I waited. "I just wanted to clear the air. You know how holidays are. Stressful." She laughed lightly. "I didn't want drama this year." That word again. Drama. The catch-all accusation used to justify cruelty. I kept my voice neutral. I wasn't invited. She paused. Not in surprise, in annoyance. "I didn't think you'd take it so personally." There it was. The minimization. The shift. "It's Christmas, Brooke. And it's my house," she snapped. Then corrected herself. "I mean, my event." I smiled slightly. "Enjoy it." That wasn't what she expected. "Wait," she said. "That's it?" "Yes." A beat of silence. "You're being weird," she said finally. I ended the call. 10 minutes later, Elaine Hollis called. Her tone was sharper this time. "Brooke is hurt." I imagined Brooke, surrounded by luxury, planning a holiday I wasn't allowed to attend, feeling hurt. I said nothing. Elaine pressed on. "She feels like you're punishing her," I answered calmly. "I'm respecting her boundary." "That's not fair," Elaine said. Neither was the exclusion. She inhaled sharply. "You've always had this cold streak, Claire." I almost laughed. "I learned it here." Silence. Then her voice softened, dangerously. "Your grandmother is getting older. Family unity matters." I heard the threat beneath the sentiment. I replied, carefully. "Margaret makes her own decisions." Elaine hung up without saying goodbye. That night, Natalie came over again. She brought wine and a file. "I pulled public records," she said, setting it on the table. "Your parents refinanced the lake property last year. They used anticipated inheritance as informal leverage with the bank." Anticipated inheritance. They were spending money they didn't yet own. They assumed it was guaranteed. It never was. Natalie watched my face. "You okay?" "Yes." That surprised her. "I feel clear." She nodded. That's usually what happens right before things explode. The explosion came in the form of a family dinner invitation. Not Christmas. Something smaller. Dinner at my parents' house. Sunday night. Elaine framed it as reconciliation. "Let's talk face to face," she said. "No tension. Just us." Just us never meant just us. It meant Brooke would be there. Evan would sit quietly. My father would attempt reason. My mother would manage optics. And they would expect me to soften. I said yes. Not because I wanted peace, but because I wanted to watch. Sunday night, I parked in front of the house I grew up in. The lights were warm. The windows glowed. Everything looked exactly as it always had. I rang the bell. Elaine opened the door with a practiced smile. Brooke was already inside, seated at the table, scrolling on her phone. Evan nodded at me from the corner. Dinner was served quickly. Conversation stayed shallow. Weather, work, Aspen. Halfway through, Elaine put her fork down. "We need to address this distance," she said. Brooke crossed her arms. "Claire's been acting like we did something unforgivable." I set my fork down too. "You excluded me." Brooke rolled her eyes. "I asked for one holiday without tension, and you got it." Elaine frowned. "This is exactly what we mean. You're being rigid." I met her gaze. "Number. I'm being observant." Richard cleared his throat. "Your grandmother hasn't been returning our calls." Brooke looked up sharply. "What?" I took a sip of water. "She's been busy." Elaine's smile tightened. "Busy with what?" I didn't answer. The air in the room shifted. Subtle. Uneasy. Brooke leaned forward. "Why are you being like this?" I looked at my sister. Really looked. "Because I'm done shrinking to make you comfortable." Her face flushed. "You think you're better than us?" I stood. "Number one, I think I finally see you clearly." Elaine stood too. "Sit down. We're not finished." I picked up my coat. "I am." As I reached the door, my father said quietly, "This isn't over." I turned back. Once. I know. Outside, the cold air felt clean. Behind me, the house glowed warm and fragile. Inside, they were just beginning to realize something had shifted, and it was already too late to stop it. They didn't call the next day. That was how I knew the dinner had unsettled them more than they wanted to admit. My family's pattern was predictable once you stopped hoping it would change. First came denial, then minimization. When that failed, they retreated to regroup. Silence wasn't peace to them. It was strategy. I let them have it. On Tuesday morning, I was in my office by 7:15 a.m., reviewing a compliance memo for a pending acquisition. The numbers were tight. The margins thinner than the board wanted. I flagged 3 issues that could trigger post-merger liability and sent them up the chain with clear recommendations. At 9:42, my assistant buzzed my line. "There's a Margaret Hollis on the phone." I answered immediately. "I heard from your father," she said without preamble. "I suspected you would. He's confused." That word again. Confused. As if clarity was a personal failing. "What did he say?" "That you were being difficult. That you're withholding information. That you're trying to make a point." Margaret gave a short, humorless laugh. I reminded him that he hasn't owned clarity in this family for decades. I smiled, despite myself. She continued, more serious now. "Your mother's pushing harder. She contacted the family accountant this morning, asking for updated projections." Projections of what? Of what they believe is coming to them. I closed my eyes briefly. "Margaret, I don't want this to turn into a war." "It won't," she said. "Wars require 2 sides who think they're equal. This is something else." I knew what she meant. They were fighting for something that had never been theirs. That afternoon, Natalie forwarded another email. Elaine contacted the attorney again. She's asking about contesting authority if an executor is named outside immediate heirs. I read it slowly. They were preparing to challenge something they didn't yet know existed. Natalie added a note. "This tells me they're worried. People don't threaten legal action unless they sense control slipping." That night, Brooke made another move. She showed up at my condo. I recognized her car from the window and didn't open the door immediately. I watched as she checked her phone, adjusted her coat, practiced an expression that looked concerned rather than irritated. When I finally opened the door, she smiled tightly. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. She didn't sit. She paced. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said. "Doing what?" "Acting like we've betrayed you." "You did," she scoffed. "You always make things bigger than they are." I leaned against the counter. "You asked for a Christmas without me." She threw up her hands. "Because every time you're around, there's this energy. Like you're judging me." That was new. "I don't talk about you at all, Brooke." "That's worse," she snapped. "You think you're above it." There it was. The real wound. I met her eyes. "I think I'm done performing." Her voice softened. calculated. You know Mom and Dad rely on me. No, I said. They enable you. Her expression hardened. If you don't fix this, you're going to tear the family apart. I let the silence stretch. Finally, I said, the family isn't fragile because of me. She stared at me, breathing shallow. You think you've won something? I shook my head. I think I stopped losing. She left without another word. I locked the door and felt nothing. The next development came from Evan. He called 2 days later, voice low, cautious. This has gotten bigger than you think, Claire. I'm aware. Mom's been crying. Dad's furious. Brooke's spiraling. I pictured them, each reacting in their own familiar way. And you? I don't want to be in the middle. You never have been, Evan. He exhaled. They're talking about legal options. I smiled faintly. So am I. He went quiet. What do you mean? I didn't elaborate. You've always been the smart one, he said finally. I just hope you know what you're doing. I do. After the call, I drove to Margaret's house again. She had guests. 2 men in suits. 1 woman with a leather portfolio. Claire, she said warmly. Come in. Perfect timing. She gestured to the woman. This is Laura Chen, my estate attorney. And these are the trustees. We shook hands. Margaret wasted no time. We're finalizing the trust structure today. I wanted Claire present. Laura smiled professionally. We'll be formalizing executor authority, oversight provisions, and conditional distributions. I sat down. Conditional how? Laura answered. Beneficiaries who attempt to interfere with administration or apply undue pressure risk suspension of disbursements. Margaret watched my face carefully. I told you. Manipulation ends here. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, everything that had once been assumed was now defined. Authority, limits, consequences. When I stood to leave, Margaret touched my arm. This will provoke them. I know. Are you prepared for that? I thought of the quiet, of the space I'd carved out, of the calm that came with clarity. Yes. The next morning, my mother left me a voicemail. Her voice trembled, but not with sadness. You think you can control everything. You're not as important as you think you are. I deleted it without replying. Because the truth was, I didn't need to be important. I just needed to stop being invisible. And they were finally seeing me, whether they liked it or not. By the time December arrived, the family wasn't pretending anymore. The silence cracked first. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, while I was reviewing a compliance audit for a Nevada partner hospital. My phone lit up with the Hollis family Christmas chat, resurrected after weeks of inactivity. Elaine Hollis wrote, "We need to clear the air before the holidays." That phrasing wasn't accidental. It framed conflict as miscommunication and positioned her as the reasonable one. Before I could ignore it, Brooke Hollis replied, "This whole thing has gone too far. Claire is tearing us apart." I didn't respond. Neither did Evan. A few minutes later, my father, Richard Hollis, added, "We are requesting a family meeting, in person, Sunday." Requesting, not inviting. Not asking. Assuming. I closed the chat and went back to my audit notes. An hour later, Natalie Pierce called. "They've hired counsel." That was fast. "Your parents retained a litigation attorney in Tacoma. Specializes in probate disputes. Aggressive type." I felt the shift settle fully into place. This was no longer emotional pressure. This was escalation. What are they planning? Natalie hesitated. They don't know yet. That's the point. They're fishing, trying to assert dominance before they understand the terrain. I pictured Elaine, composed and indignant. Richard, silent and resentful. Brooke, furious that something wasn't bending to her will. They were used to emotional leverage. Legal structure terrified them. "Let them flail," I said. Natalie exhaled softly. Margaret anticipated this. She asked me to be ready. I smiled faintly. Of course she did. Sunday came quickly. I didn't go to my parents' house. I met them at a neutral location instead. A private room at a restaurant near Lake Union. Clean, public, controlled. When I walked in, they were already seated. Elaine looked tense. Richard avoided my eyes. Brooke sat rigid, arms crossed. Evan wasn't there. That omission wasn't accidental either. I sat down calmly. Elaine spoke first. "This didn't need to become adversarial." I folded my hands. "Then why did you hire a lawyer?" Her lips pressed thin. We're protecting the family. From what? From interference, Brooke snapped. From manipulation. I turned to her. From whom? She hesitated. Just a beat too long. You, she said. There it was. I nodded once. Thank you for saying it out loud. Richard leaned forward. Your grandmother is being influenced. I met his gaze evenly. By facts? Elaine cut in. She's elderly, vulnerable. Margaret Hollis was neither, I replied calmly. Margaret is competent and decisive. She always has been. Brooke scoffed. You think you're smarter than everyone else, I corrected her. I think I stopped pretending you're entitled to outcomes you didn't earn. Elaine raised her voice slightly. This is exactly the attitude that's destroying us. I waited. Let the room settle. Then I said, quietly, this family has never been destroyed by honesty. Only by avoidance. Silence. Richard finally spoke. What do you want? That was the first honest question of the night. I don't want anything from you. Brooke laughed sharply. That's not true. It is. Elaine leaned back, studying me. Then why are you doing this? I looked at my mother. Really looked at her. Because I was erased, and I decided not to disappear quietly. Her expression flickered. Something like recognition or fear. I stood. This meeting isn't productive. Any further communication should go through counsel. Brooke stood too. You're unbelievable. I smiled faintly. You've always believed that. I left them there. Outside, the night air was cold and steady. Clean. My phone buzzed as I walked to my car. A message from Natalie. They just tried to file an emergency petition for information disclosure. It was denied. I didn't stop walking. Margaret's protections were airtight. 2 days later, Aspen happened without me. Brooke flooded social media with images of luxury, fireplaces, champagne, matching pajamas, the appearance of unity. The comments were glowing. Family goals. So blessed. Nothing matters more than togetherness. I didn't look twice. On Christmas morning, I woke up alone in my condo, made coffee, watched the rain slide down the windows. I felt calm. At 10:03 a.m., my phone rang. Margaret. Merry Christmas, Claire. Merry Christmas. She paused. They're very upset. I imagine them, snowed in and seething. Are you? No, she said. I'm relieved. That word again. Relief. She continued. I finalized the trust this morning. I closed my eyes briefly. Done? Done. She added, carefully. They've been notified that all inquiries must go through the executor. Me. Yes. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. You earned it, she said. Not by fighting, by standing still. That afternoon, Evan texted me privately. I didn't know it was this bad. I replied once. It's always this bad. You just didn't have to carry it. He didn't respond. That night, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I reviewed documents, cross-checked dates, prepared. Because when people who rely on control lose it, they don't retreat. They strike. And I knew the next move wouldn't be emotional. It would be public. Christmas was over. The real consequences were just beginning. The first public strike came 3 days after Christmas. It didn't arrive as a phone call or a message. It arrived as an email forwarded to me by Natalie Pierce with a single line typed above it. They're trying to poison the well. The email had been sent by my father, Richard Hollis, to 3 extended family members, 2 longtime family friends, and 1 former business partner of my grandmother's. Subject: concerning developments regarding Margaret Hollis. The body was careful. Too careful. Richard wrote about concern, about confusion, about sudden changes in Margaret's behavior, about how she had been isolating herself and making decisions that don't reflect her lifelong values. He never mentioned my name directly. He didn't have to. The implication sat between every line. I read it once, then again, more slowly. This wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was narrative control. They weren't challenging the facts. They were attacking credibility. Natalie called minutes later. This is classic. Preemptive reputation damage. If they frame Margaret as compromised, they can argue undue influence later. I leaned back in my chair. And me? You're the unspoken threat. The convenient explanation. I closed my eyes briefly. How bad is it? Natalie was quiet for a moment. It's not effective. Not yet. but it's deliberate. Good, I said. Then we proceed. Proceed how? By staying exactly where I am. Silence was my strongest position. The next move came from Elaine. She didn't contact me directly. She contacted my employer. The email was sent to my company's general counsel, copied to HR, and forwarded to me within the hour. Elaine expressed concern about my emotional stability, given recent family stressors, and questioned whether I was fit to oversee sensitive regulatory matters. She signed it as a worried mother. I stared at the screen, pulse steady. Natalie swore when I forwarded it to her. That crossed a line. Yes, it did, but it also revealed desperation. I scheduled a meeting with my company's legal team that afternoon. I didn't bring emotion. I brought documentation. I walked them through my performance metrics, my audit outcomes, my spotless compliance record, letters of recommendation from federal reviewers, measurable results. Then I handed them the email. This is a family dispute, I said calmly. It has no bearing on my professional conduct. The general counsel nodded. We agree. HR documented the incident as external harassment. Elaine's attempt to destabilize me professionally failed within 20 minutes. That was when I understood something important. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to exhaust me. That night, Brooke made her own public move. She posted a long Instagram caption under a photo of her in Aspen, wrapped in a blanket by the fire. The caption talked about boundaries, about toxic relationships, about how sometimes family members try to control what isn't theirs. The comments filled quickly. So brave. Protect your peace. Blood doesn't mean entitlement. I read it once. Then I closed the app. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking about me. The next morning, Margaret called. They're circling, she said. I know. Are you okay? Yes. She hummed thoughtfully. Good. Because this is the part where they overreach. At noon, Natalie sent another update. Your parents' attorney filed a formal request for accounting. Not legally enforceable yet, but aggressive. I nodded to myself. They were escalating without ammunition. We responded through counsel. Brief, polite, unyielding. That afternoon, Evan showed up at my office. My assistant looked uncertain when she buzzed me. He says it's urgent. I let him in. He looked tired, older than I remembered. This has gotten out of control, he said. I gestured for him to sit. He didn't. Mom called my boss, Claire. I know. She crossed a line. Yes. He ran a hand through his hair. She's scared. That wasn't my problem. Scared of what? Of losing everything. I studied him. She's afraid of losing control. He didn't argue. Dad's talking about going public, Evan added. Public how? Talking to people. Planting doubts. I nodded. That's already happening. Evan's voice dropped. Why didn't you just let Christmas go? I looked at my brother. Because it was never about Christmas. He frowned. Then what is it about? Power. The word sat between us. He exhaled. Brooke thinks you're punishing her, I replied evenly. Brooke punished herself the moment she decided exclusion was acceptable. He didn't have a response. Before he left, he said quietly, they're not going to stop. I met his eyes. Neither am I. That evening, I went to Margaret's house again. She was waiting for me in the living room, documents neatly stacked. I've decided something, she said. I sat. I'm accelerating part of the plan. I didn't interrupt. I want you formally introduced as executor to the trustees and accountants. Immediately. That's sooner than we discussed. Yes, she met my gaze. They're already acting as if something has been taken. Let them feel the reality. I understood. When people believe power is slipping, clarity feels like cruelty. Are you ready for that? I thought of the email, the post, the call to my employer. Yes. The next day, formal notices went out. Trustees, accountants, legal representatives. My name was no longer implied. It was printed. By evening, my phone was vibrating constantly. Elaine called 6 times. Richard, twice. Brooke left a voicemail, her voice shaking with fury. You've gone too far. I didn't respond. At 9:47 p.m., a final message came from my mother. You think this makes you strong. It doesn't. It makes you alone. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I deleted it, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. I was just no longer available for manipulation. And the more they fought, the clearer it became. They weren't losing me. They were losing the version of me who absorbed their damage quietly. The next move would be uglier. And this time, they'd make sure everyone was watching. They made sure everyone was watching. The story broke on a Wednesday morning, just after 9, when I was halfway through a quarterly compliance briefing. My phone vibrated once, then again, then didn't stop. I finished the sentence I was on, closed my folder, and excused myself from the room, without explanation. In the hallway, Natalie Pierce was already calling. It's out. Out how? Local business blog picked it up first, then a regional paper. They're framing it as a family dispute, threatening the stability of Hollis Tool and Die. I leaned against the wall. What exactly are they saying? Natalie didn't sugarcoat it. That your grandmother is being isolated. That a younger family member has assumed control. That long-standing succession plans have been disrupted. They're implying undue influence without using the words. They didn't mention my name directly, did they? Once. At the bottom. Described as a relative recently elevated to a position of authority. I closed my eyes briefly. That was deliberate. They weren't accusing me outright. They were inviting speculation. By the time I got back to my office, the article had already been shared hundreds of times. The comments were divided, some sympathetic, some suspicious, some hungry for drama. I didn't read them. At 11:30 a.m., my assistant buzzed me again. Your mother is here. I didn't ask how she'd gotten past security. I said, send her in. Elaine Hollis entered my office like she owned it. Perfect hair, controlled expression, the kind of composure that suggested she believed she was still in charge. She closed the door behind her. You've embarrassed this family publicly. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit down. She didn't. We had no choice, she continued. You forced our hand. I folded my hands on the desk. You contacted my employer. You questioned my competence. You hired counsel. You leaked a narrative to the press. She waved a hand. We're protecting ourselves. From what? From you taking everything. There it was, the fear stripped bare. I met her eyes. I didn't take anything. I was appointed by manipulating your grandmother. I smiled faintly. That's the story you're telling yourself. Her voice sharpened. You think because you wear a suit and speak calmly that you're innocent. You've always been calculating. I didn't raise my voice. I've always been observant. She stepped closer. You could still fix this. Fix it how? Step down. Tell people this was a misunderstanding. Let your father handle things like he always has. I stood. No. Her face tightened. You're choosing this. I nodded. I'm choosing myself. She stared at me, something raw flickering in her eyes. Then she straightened. Then don't be surprised by what comes next. She left without another word. At 1:04 p.m., Margaret called. I saw the article, she said. I figured you had. Are you shaken? No. Good. Because I want to make something very clear. I listened. I gave a statement. To whom? The press. I blinked. Margaret. I did not name names, she continued calmly. I clarified that I am of sound mind, fully informed, and confident in my decisions. I stated that any claims otherwise are false and harmful. I let out a slow breath. Thank you. I'm not finished, she added. At 3 p.m., the paper updated the article. A new paragraph appeared near the top. In a statement, Margaret Hollis said, I have appointed my granddaughter, Claire Hollis, as executor because she is the only family member who has consistently demonstrated judgment without entitlement. Any suggestion that I am being influenced is insulting and inaccurate. My phone lit up. Texts, emails, calls. Evan. Distant relatives. Old family friends. Some asking questions. Some offering quiet support. Some suddenly very polite. By evening, the narrative had shifted. The comments turned. Why would a grandmother need protecting from her own children? Sounds like sour grapes. Funny how the calm one is always called manipulative. Brooke posted again. This time, no captions. Just a black screen, white text. Silence can be violent. I closed the app. That night, Evan called. They're panicking, he said. I imagined my parents' living room, the tension, the raised voices. Brooke pacing, Elaine furious, Richard silent. Dad's worried about the business. Is he worried about his mother? Evan didn't answer. They didn't think you'd hold your ground. I leaned back in my chair. Neither did I. Once. He hesitated. What happens now? I answered honestly. Now the truth finishes its work. The next morning, Hollis Tool and Die's board requested a formal meeting, not with my father, with me. When I arrived at the company headquarters, the room was full. Board members, legal counsel, financial advisors. I took my seat calmly. The chairman spoke first. We need clarity. You'll have it. I laid out the facts. Ownership structure, governance, my grandmother's stake, my role. No accusations, no emotion, just reality. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to maintain current operations under existing management, with oversight reporting directly to the trust. My father was still CEO, but now he answered to something he didn't control. When I left the building, the sky was gray and low. The air smelled like rain. My phone buzzed with a final message from Brooke. You've ruined everything, I typed once, then deleted it. Some things didn't need a response, because nothing had been ruined. It had been revealed. And once a system is exposed, it can never go back to pretending it was fair. They had made it public. They had wanted witnesses. Now they had them. And the next chapter wouldn't be about control. It would be about consequences. Consequences rarely arrive all at once. They seep in quietly, through cracks people didn't know were there, until the structure starts to lean under its own weight. The first crack appeared in the business. 2 days after the board meeting, Hollis Tool & Die's largest regional client requested a compliance review. Not an audit, a review. Polite on the surface, but loaded underneath. The request wasn't random. The client's legal team had read the article. They wanted reassurance that governance was stable. I handled it personally. I spent 6 hours compiling documentation, ownership clarity, operational continuity, risk mitigation protocols. I delivered it without commentary. By the end of the week, the client renewed their contract. My father didn't thank me. He didn't have to. The second crack appeared socially. Elaine's weekly charity luncheon quietly uninvited her from the planning committee. No explanation. Just a brief email about shifting priorities. Brooke's friends stopped posting her. Photos disappeared. Tags were removed. Invitations slowed. People didn't abandon them out of loyalty to me. They backed away from instability. That was harder to argue with. The third crack came closer to home. Evan called late one night. Mom's not sleeping. I let the silence sit. She keeps saying she never thought it would go this far. I pictured my mother, restless, pacing, replaying moments where she assumed compliance was guaranteed. It was always this far, I said. He exhaled. Dad's drinking more. I didn't respond. Evan hesitated. Do you feel bad? I thought carefully before answering. I feel clear. That wasn't what he wanted. The real confrontation came the following Sunday. Margaret invited everyone to her house. Everyone meant all of us. I arrived early. Margaret sat in her living room, composed, a stack of documents beside her. Untouched tea cooling on the table. Are you ready? She asked. Yes. They arrived together. Elaine first, Richard behind her, Brooke last. Brooke looked brittle. Elaine looked controlled. Richard looked tired. We sat. Margaret didn't ease into it. I've watched this family fracture for years, she said. I allowed it because I believed peace was preferable to conflict. I was wrong. Elaine stiffened. Mother, we're here to resolve this. Margaret turned her gaze to her. No, Elaine, we're here to name it. She gestured toward me. Claire has been treated as expendable, useful when needed, invisible when inconvenient. Brooke scoffed. That's not true. Margaret's voice remained steady. You excluded your sister from Christmas. Brooke opened her mouth, then closed it. Margaret continued. You questioned my competence. You attempted to undermine legal decisions you didn't like. You confused entitlement with inheritance. Elaine leaned forward. You're letting her turn you against us. Margaret looked almost amused. If one conversation was enough to undo decades of influence, perhaps you should reflect on that. Silence thickened the room. Richard spoke quietly. What do you want us to do? Margaret answered. Take responsibility. Elaine shook her head. For what? For trying to protect our family? Margaret met her gaze. From accountability. Brooke stood abruptly. So what? I'm the villain now? Margaret didn't raise her voice. No. You're the beneficiary of a system that required someone else to be diminished. Brooke's eyes flashed. You always favored her. Margaret nodded once. Because she never asked for more than what was fair. That landed. Elaine's composure cracked slightly. You're tearing us apart, Margaret corrected her. I'm naming what already broke. Then she turned to me. Claire, do you have anything to say? I stood. I didn't rehearse. I didn't accuse. I spoke simply. I didn't want power. I wanted dignity. I didn't seek conflict. I responded to exclusion. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to stop participating in a system that required my silence. Brooke laughed bitterly. So you get everything. I met her eyes. I get clarity. Richard rubbed his temples. What happens now? Margaret answered. Now, boundaries replace assumptions. She slid a document across the table. These are the finalized trust conditions. Anyone who challenges administration forfeits discretionary distributions. Elaine stared at the paper. Is this a threat? Margaret smiled thinly. It's a consequence. No one spoke. Eventually, Brooke turned to me. Are you happy? I thought of my quiet mornings, my steady work, my clean conscience. Yes. She looked away. They left shortly after. No hugs, no reconciliation. But something fundamental had shifted. Later that night, Margaret poured tea. You did well. I nodded. They didn't hear me. They did, she said. They just didn't like what they heard. On my drive home, my phone buzzed with a message from Natalie. They've withdrawn the inquiry. Your parents' attorney stepped back. I smiled faintly. At home, I stood by the window, watching the city lights blink on. The system hadn't collapsed. It had adjusted. And the people who once believed exclusion was harmless were learning something new. Silence, when chosen, is power. And I was no longer quiet. The last cracks were coming. And when they did, nothing false would survive them. The fallout didn't explode. It thinned. That was the part no one prepared for. When manipulation fails, it doesn't always turn violent. Sometimes it evaporates, leaving people exposed in ways they can't spin. The first thing that disappeared was access. Elaine stopped calling entirely. No more late-night voicemails. No more carefully worded texts. The silence this time wasn't strategic. It was wounded. Brooke tried to fill the vacuum. She showed up everywhere I didn't expect her to be. At a charity event my company sponsored. At a mutual friend's birthday dinner. Once, unexpectedly, in the lobby of my building. Each time, she acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled too brightly, asked neutral questions, made small talk like we were distant coworkers, instead of sisters who detonated a family system. I kept it civil. That restraint confused her more than anger ever would have. One afternoon, she cornered me by the elevators. You really won't talk to me, she said. I met her eyes. We're talking now. You know what I mean. I did. You want reassurance, I said, not conversation. Her jaw tightened. You enjoy this. I shook my head. I enjoy not explaining myself anymore. She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. The second thing that disappeared was certainty. Hollis Toole and I began to feel the shift internally. Nothing dramatic, no firings, no lawsuits, just questions. Employees asked about governance. Middle managers requested written clarification on authority. Vendors began copying the trust's legal counsel on correspondence. My father's position hadn't changed on paper, but his autonomy had. He called me late one night. I almost didn't answer. When I did, his voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I didn't expect this, he said. Expect what? To feel like I'm reporting on my own life. I let that sit. You've always been capable, Claire. That landed harder than an apology. Why now? Because now I have to account for things. I didn't respond. He continued. Your mother thinks this is temporary, that eventually you'll get tired. I smiled faintly. I already am. Just not in the way she hopes. Silence. He asked quietly, did we really treat you that badly? There it was. The closest he'd come to honesty. I answered carefully. You treated me as optional. He didn't argue. The third thing that disappeared was loyalty. It didn't vanish dramatically. It shifted allegiances quietly, one conversation at a time. Family friends began reaching out to me directly, not to ask questions, to recalibrate. Your grandmother seems well, one said, clear-minded. Another asked if I'd be willing to attend an event in her place. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I noticed. Brooke noticed too. She called one evening, her voice unsteady. They don't call me anymore. I pictured her in her house, the one my parents helped her buy. The one that had always felt like a stage set. People come and go, I said. Not like this. I didn't reply. She tried again. You turned everyone against me, I corrected her. You relied on everyone staying silent. Her breath hitched. I didn't know it would cost me this much. That was the truth slipping through. I ended the call gently. The final shift came from Margaret. She invited me to lunch on a Tuesday. We sat in a quiet restaurant overlooking the water. She ordered tea. I ordered soup. You've done what needed doing, she said. I waited. Now comes the harder part. What's that? Living without the tension. I frowned slightly. You mean forgiveness? She smiled. No. Detachment. She set her cup down. There's a moment after control breaks where everyone waits for it to be restored. When it isn't, they'll either change or drift. I understood. What if they never change? Then you'll grieve the version of them that never existed. That landed cleanly. After lunch, she handed me an envelope. What's this? Letters, she said. Written years ago. I never sent them. I opened it later, alone. They were addressed to my parents, to Brooke, to Evan. They named favoritism, silence, complicity. They weren't angry. They were precise. Margaret had seen everything long before I had. She just waited until someone was ready to hold it. That night, Evan came over. He looked exhausted. I don't know where I fit anymore, he said. I gestured for him to sit. You never had to pick a side, Evan. You just have to pick honesty. He swallowed. Mom says you're cold, I shrugged. Cold is what they call boundaries when they don't benefit from them. He nodded slowly. I think I've been hiding. I didn't disagree. Before he left, he said quietly, I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. I met his gaze. I believe you. That mattered. The next morning, I received a formal notice. My parents' attorney had withdrawn entirely. No explanation. No follow-up. The legal noise stopped, not because they'd won, because they couldn't. I stood in my office, sunlight cutting across the floor, and felt something unfamiliar. Stillness, not the anxious kind, the earned kind. My phone buzzed once more. A message from Brooke. I don't know who I am without this family. I typed. Deleted. Typed again. Then sent one sentence. Neither did I. Until I left it. I put the phone down. Outside, the city moved forward. Indifferent. Honest. The system had done what systems do when pressure is applied. It revealed its weak points. And what remained was small, but real. The final chapter wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be irreversible. By the time spring arrived, no one was pretending anymore. The story had burned through its loudest phase and settled into something quieter, heavier. The kind of aftermath that doesn't trend or explode, but rewires relationships permanently. The first real consequence came through paperwork. A formal notice arrived from the trust legal office, confirming updated beneficiary projections. Nothing dramatic, just adjusted expectations based on compliance with trust conditions. Elaine received hers first. She didn't call me. She drove to Margaret's house instead. Margaret told me about it later. Her voice measured. She sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before knocking. I pictured my mother, carefully composed, rehearsing her position. What did she say? That she felt blindsided. That this wasn't what she imagined for her life. Margaret paused. I told her imagination is not entitlement. I smiled faintly. Brooke's notice arrived the same week. She called this time. Her voice was flat. They reduced it. Yes, because you attempted interference. She was quiet. She thought everything was guaranteed. Nothing ever was. That landed. The second consequence came socially, in a way no one could argue with. My parents stopped receiving invitations. Not publicly, not cruelly. They just weren't included. Charity boards rotated leadership. Holiday dinners shifted hosts. People recalibrated their distance based on risk, not loyalty. Elaine noticed. She always noticed optics. She called Evan instead of me. Why are people pulling away? Evan told me about it later. What did you say? I said maybe people are uncomfortable with instability. I nodded. That was accurate. The third consequence was internal. Richard called again, weeks after our last conversation. This time, his voice didn't carry authority. It carried uncertainty. I don't recognize my life anymore. I leaned back in my chair. That happens when the rules change. He sighed. I thought if I kept my head down, things would work out. For who? He didn't answer. Then he asked something that surprised me. Do you think I failed you? I considered it carefully. You failed to intervene. That was honest, not cruel. He swallowed. I see that now. That was new. The conversation didn't end in reconciliation, but it ended in recognition. And that mattered. The fourth consequence came quietly. One evening in my own living room, I was organizing files when I found an old photo. Me at 16, standing between my parents, smiling too carefully. I stared at it longer than necessary. That girl had learned early that approval was conditional. I folded the photo and put it away. I didn't need it anymore. Margaret invited me to dinner the following Sunday, just the two of us. She cooked. Simple food, familiar flavors. You know, she said over dessert, people often mistake consequence for punishment. I nodded. Punishment is emotional. Consequence is structural. Exactly. She met my eyes. You didn't hurt them. You stopped cushioning their choices. That was the difference. I thought of Brooke, of Elaine, of Richard, of how many years I'd absorbed the discomfort so they wouldn't have to feel it. Later that week, Brooke sent me a message. I'm in therapy. I read it twice. That was unexpected, she added. I didn't realize how much I needed everyone else to orbit me. I didn't respond immediately. When I did, I wrote one sentence. I hope you find clarity there. That was all I could offer. The final consequence came from the business. The board announced a long-term succession plan. My father would transition out within 18 months. Not forced, structured. He told me himself. I always thought the company was my legacy, he said. I answered calmly. It was always Margaret's. He nodded. I guess I never really listened. That night, I walked through my neighborhood. The air soft with early spring. I felt lighter. Not because I'd won. Because I'd stopped carrying what was never mine to begin with. The system hadn't collapsed. It had corrected. And in that correction, everyone was finally accountable to something real. There were no speeches, no apologies wrapped in tears, just distance where there needed to be distance, and peace where there had once been pressure. The last chapter wasn't about revenge. It was about release, and it was coming quietly, without witnesses, without negotiation, without going back. The quiet after upheaval is deceptive. At first, it feels like emptiness, space where noise used to live. Then, slowly, you realize it's something else entirely. It's room. The weeks after my father's succession announcement passed without incident. No calls from Elaine, no texts from Brooke. Evan checked in occasionally, careful and subdued, like someone relearning how to speak without performing. I didn't fill the silence. I let it settle. That was when the grief arrived. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just present. It came in ordinary moments. Folding laundry, waiting for a crosswalk, standing in line at the grocery store when a mother laughed with her adult daughter ahead of me. I didn't miss my family as they were. I grieved the family I'd been trained to hope for. That distinction mattered. One evening, Margaret called and asked if I'd come by. Her voice sounded tired. I found her in her living room, wrapped in a shawl, papers untouched on the table. Sit with me, she said. I did. For a long moment, we didn't speak. Then she said quietly, "You've done something rare." I waited. "You broke a pattern without becoming cruel." I thought about that. I didn't always feel kind. Kindness isn't the same as self-betrayal, she said. You chose integrity over appeasement. She turned her head toward me. That takes a particular kind of strength. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. She smiled faintly. I wanted you to know something. I listened. When I was your age, I didn't do what you did. I stayed quiet longer than I should have. I let my children believe comfort was more important than truth. She closed her eyes briefly. You corrected something I never did. That landed heavier than praise. I stayed until she fell asleep in her chair, then quietly left. The next shift came from Brooke. She asked to meet. Not through Elaine, not through Evan. Directly. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral ground. She looked different, less polished, more real. We sat across from each other, steam rising between us. I didn't expect you to come, she said. I didn't promise anything. She nodded. Therapy is uncomfortable. I said nothing. She took a breath. I thought being the center meant being loved. I waited. I didn't realize how much I needed people to need me. That was the first honest thing she'd ever said to me. She looked up. I don't know if we can fix this, I answered truthfully. I don't know either. She swallowed. But I wanted you to know I see it now. Not everything, but enough. I nodded once. That's yours to work through. She flinched slightly. You don't owe me forgiveness, do you? No. She absorbed that. I'm not asking, she said. I just wanted to say it out loud. That mattered more than I expected. When we stood to leave, she hesitated. I don't hate you. I met her eyes. I know. That was the closest we'd ever come to understanding. The real closure came unexpectedly. A letter arrived at my condo, handwritten, from my mother. It wasn't long. It wasn't an apology. It was acknowledgement. She wrote about confusion, about fear, about how losing control felt like losing safety. She admitted, without naming it directly, that she had relied on me to absorb discomfort so others wouldn't have to. She didn't ask for reconciliation. She asked for time. I read it once. Then I placed it in a drawer. Time was something I could give. Access was not. That night, I walked through my home slowly. The space felt intentional, quiet, mine. I realized something then. For the first time in my life, my peace wasn't conditional. It didn't depend on approval, or silence, or compliance. It existed because I'd chosen it. The next morning, I received confirmation from the Trust's legal office. All matters settled. No pending disputes. No challenges. It was over. Not with a bang, with finality. At work, I closed a major compliance cycle that week. The board commended my leadership. No one mentioned my family. No one needed to. At lunch, Natalie met me and raised her glass. You did it, she said. I smiled. I stopped doing it. She laughed softly. That's usually how it works. Later, Evan texted. Mom's calmer. Dad's quieter. Brooke's trying, I replied. That's theirs, he responded. I'm proud of you. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Thank you. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no rehearsals, no tension humming beneath the surface. Just rest. The next chapter of my life wouldn't be about conflict. It would be about construction, building something that didn't require sacrifice to sustain. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what would happen if I didn't keep everyone else comfortable, because I finally understood something simple. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the absence of self-betrayal. And I had crossed that line for the last time. The year ended without ceremony. No dramatic reunion. No final confrontation. No cinematic apology that wrapped everything in something easy. Just time doing what time does best, when you stop interfering with it. I spent New Year's Eve alone in my condo. Not lonely, alone by choice. I cooked something simple, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, and watched the city lights blink on one by one. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Evan. Happy New Year. I hope this year is lighter for you, I replied. It already is. That was the truth. January came quietly. Work settled into a steady rhythm. The board approved a new compliance framework I'd designed, and I was asked to lead a national rollout. My days were full, in the way that feels earned, not draining. Margaret and I kept our Sunday lunches. Sometimes we talked about the trust. Sometimes we talked about nothing important at all. She liked hearing about my work. I liked listening to her stories, the ones she'd never told when I was younger. One afternoon, she said something that stayed with me. You know why this worked, don't you? I waited. Because you didn't try to win. You simply stopped losing. That was the difference. In February, Brooke sent me a message that surprised me. I moved out of the house Mom and Dad helped me buy. I'm renting something smaller. I needed to know what my life looks like without them propping it up. I read it carefully. That wasn't growth yet, but it was movement. I replied with one line. I hope it brings you clarity. She didn't answer, and that was fine. Elaine didn't reach out again. Not directly, but I heard through Evan that she'd stopped telling people her version of events. The story was harder to sell when no one was arguing with it. Richard transitioned out of the company in the spring. The board announced it publicly, framed as a natural evolution. He attended the farewell dinner, shook hands, smiled for photos. He sent me a message afterward. I'm trying to learn who I am without the role. I answered honestly. That takes time. He wrote back. I'm starting to understand that. That was enough. The real marker of change came in a moment so small, I almost missed it. I was at the grocery store, standing in line behind a mother and her adult daughter. They were arguing quietly about dinner plans, laughing halfway through it, comfortable enough to disagree without fear. I watched them for a moment. Then I felt something settle instead of ache. Acceptance. Not because I had that, but because I no longer needed it. The family I came from had shown me exactly what they were capable of. No more, no less. And once you stop negotiating with reality, it becomes surprisingly manageable. In April, Margaret updated the trust again. Minor adjustments, long-term planning. She walked me through it with the same calm clarity she always had. You'll take over fully one day, she said. I nodded. Are you ready for that responsibility? I thought of the last year, the pressure, the resistance, the stillness that followed. Yes, she smiled. Good. Because leadership isn't about control. It's about containment. You hold the structure so others don't collapse under it. I understood that now. By summer, the story had faded everywhere, except where it mattered. My parents weren't villains to the world. They weren't exposed or humiliated. They simply weren't central anymore. And that, I realized, was the consequence they never anticipated. Not punishment. Irrelevance. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. On my birthday, I took the day off. I went for a long walk along the water. I ate lunch alone at a quiet place I liked. I turned my phone off for 3 hours. When I turned it back on, there were messages. Natalie, teasing me about getting older. Evan, thoughtful and tentative. Margaret, precise and warm. And one from Brooke. Happy birthday. I hope you're doing well. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I replied, thank you. That was the shape of things now. Smaller, cleaner, real. That night, I stood on my balcony and watched the sun sink behind the buildings. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who learned early that being easy to manage was safer than being seen. She'd done her best with the tools she had. I didn't resent her. I just didn't live by her rules anymore. Here's what I know now. Revenge doesn't always look like payback. Sometimes it looks like opting out. Family drama thrives on reaction, on emotional labor, on someone willing to absorb the impact so others don't have to. The moment you stop volunteering for that role, the system panics. Then it recalibrates. Then it reveals itself. I didn't burn anything down. I stepped away. And in doing that, I let the truth stand on its own without cushioning it. That was enough. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself somewhere in it, here's what I want you to understand. You don't have to prove your worth to people who benefit from you doubting it. You don't have to stay in rooms where your absence is easier than your presence. You don't need a dramatic exit or a perfect speech. Sometimes the most controlled revenge is simply refusing to play the role you were assigned. Choosing yourself doesn't always look loud. Often, it looks like silence, boundaries, distance, peace. If this story resonated with you, like it if it helped you name something you've been carrying. Comment if you've ever been excluded, minimized, or made responsible for other people's comfort. Subscribe if you want more stories about family drama, betrayal, revenge, and the quiet kind of justice that actually lasts. Because the tables don't always flip in a single moment. Sometimes they just stop being set for you. And that's when your life finally begins.